read this book a few years ago called, what was it called? It's by Julian Janes. It was called something like The Origin of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind. I think that might be it actually, or something like that certainly. It was popular for a few weeks and then kind of fell off the map because people thought it was rubbish. But there were some interesting things about it. I mean, Daniel Dennett said that it's almost certainly wrong, but it's the right kind of answer, he said. By which he meant that, I should just say this book was about, as the name implies, the origin of consciousness. And what Daniel Dennett's faint praise there was that, although that the ideas that Julian Janes was coming up with were spurious in all likelihood, there's a need for some kind of an explanation of where consciousness comes from, this modern feeling we have of being alive and awake, and of simultaneously knowing that we're alive and awake. There needs some kinds of origins for that, so you need some kind of story about, you know, what the building blocks were, what the intermediate stages were, all those kind of things. So although Julian James's model is probably wrong, at least it's a stab in the right direction. But what the idea is in this bicameral model thing is that he's claiming that at some point in human history, and he's talking about recent human history, or relatively recent human history, the times of the ancient Greeks, he's talking about Homer particularly, at some point in our history we didn't have the consciousness we have now. We had a different kind of consciousness, or we had a precursor to contemporary consciousness, in which that kind of self-reflexiveness that we have, the fact that we know that we're thinking and we're thinking and we're knowing we're thinking, that kind of reflexive process, the dots weren't completely joined up in that. So we were doing the thinking and then we were kind of hearing our thinking, but we didn't connect the dots and make the loop, so we owned that whole little reflexive re-entry loop, so we didn't really know it was us that was thinking. And in Julian Janes, what he's saying there is that the writings of the ancient Greeks, and he's talking about Homer particularly, as I say, is that that's a record of this odd process that was going on in people's minds then, when they heard voices in their heads. They heard their own thinking, but didn't have that sense of ownership that we have now, sense of continuity of consciousness that we have. And so they would attribute the voices in their heads to the voices of the gods. That was the idea. So you would hear the gods talking to you, and you would hear their voices, and it wouldn't be, you wouldn't experience, you wouldn't think, oh, that's me. So you would just hear those voices. As I say, it's a at least controversial or speculative idea, but it's a great idea, I think. I really like the idea, and I quite like this. Not sure if "like's" the right word, but I'm quite intrigued by this idea of voices in the head, because I think most of us have had voices in our head at various times. I certainly have. And Douglas Hofstadter talks about this in this really nice book called I'm a Strange Loop, where at one he's talking about his people who've died, who's been close to him, his wife, and he talks about his mother and father at one point, and he talks about how he still hears their voices, and he's not delusional. He's not. He doesn't really think that they're whispering in his ear or that their voices beyond the grave. He knows it's his own kind of desires and his own wishes and his own memories that are kind of coming alive for him and haunting him. But that doesn't stop the reality, not reality, but doesn't stop the experience of those things, the phenomenological experience, I suppose I should say. And I've certainly had that. I've heard, occasionally, I've heard as if from outside, those kind of voices, or as if detached from me. I've always been able to know that they were from what their origins were, and place them within a context of ownership. So I've not been doubting my sanity in that sense, but so I kind of know what Hofstadter's talking about. But it's a really interesting idea, that. I mean, certainly one of the things that I've done before now is to try to see if I can hear those voices. I mean, there's lots of exercises in the arts and in creative writing and those kind of circles where you try to free up internal voices. Things like automatic writing exercises, that kind of thing, or improvisational exercises where you just seem to take the blocks away from your own thoughts and let whatever's there come out. So I've done quite a lot of those kind of things. But one thing that I do is just try to attend very, very carefully it's not exactly listening, but it's a bit like listening. It's a combination between listening and feeling, I guess. But just try to listen very carefully when I'm in a quiet room sometimes and see if I can hear any voices inside myself. And occasionally I can. I have to really work hard at it. But if I can get everything really quiet and really attend, I can sometimes hear voices. Again, I can never attribute them to anything else, partly because the sheer bloody effort of trying to attend to these voices just, makes it really clear to me that it's a creative act on my part. I'm creating it. I'm not tuning some kind of weird internal antenna to the voices of spirits, nor am I, there's not a radio inside my head that's being beamed in, so the alien voices are being beamed in. I can't really buy into those kind of stories, just because the sheer effort that I'm putting into it is telling me that it's something I'm doing, really. But I do like that, and I like the idea that there's some chatter going on behind the scenes, kind of. As long as I feel safely, it's safe, and I'm not, I don't know how to put it really, as long as I'm not kind of overwhelmed by that, or I'm not intruded into by those voices. I quite like the idea. There's a quotation somewhere about the human psyche being a drama, not a monologue, and that's one I've always found quite interesting. This idea that there's all these different little elements of my psyche, all with different needs and wants, and ambitions and memories and responses, and they're all making this little clamouring noise somewhere in the back there. And what actually comes out of my mouth, or what appears as my unitary consciousness, is just the kind of susurrus of those voices. Like the noise you get when you're outside a football stadium. All the voices are active, but all you hear is this kind of pulse and rhythm and flow of kind of chorus, really. It's freezing again here in Cheshire. The canal is completely frozen. Look at that. Marvellous. This is just a little addendum to the last thing I did on hearing voices, really. I don't know where this came from. I'm just reminded of this book by Oliver Sacks, a neurologist, most famous for writing The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, a whole series of case histories about his experience as a neurologist. Fascinating stuff. But he did one a bit after that called Seeing Voices, which was about experiences with deaf communities or working with deaf patients. It was fascinating, actually. It was really great. And one of the images that stuck with me from that book was about this particular, I don't know if this is common amongst deaf people, but it was one particular lad he was talking about who dreamt a lot. And in the same way that some people talk while they're dreaming, my sister used to do it, this lad would sign whilst he was dreaming. So he'd be asleep and dreaming, but his hands would be in motion sometimes when he was dreaming. Which I didn't think was possible, because I thought you were paralysed when you were dreaming, but anyway, apparently not. He would be able to sign whilst he was dreaming. And I suppose that just prompted in me this idea to do with signing and gesture and body language more generally. That certainly, whilst the sound coming out of my mouth in terms of the meanings of the words that I'm saying is fairly unified, quite a lot of the time I think that unitary meaning, that single voice which I seem to be capable of producing, which all of us seem to be capable of producing, even though it's probably a product of a whole chorus of voices lying behind the scenes, it does have this unitary quality. But always accompanying that, I think, is this other voice, or set of voices that the rest of the physical body is narrating, is announcing. So all the things that I'm doing with my hands, rather like this lad sleep signing, all these things I'm doing with my hands, sometimes they complement what I'm saying with my mouth, but sometimes they're contradicting it, I think. And all of the accents that the rest of my physicality is engaged in, and all the kind of paralinguistic stuff to do with pauses and intonations and all those kind of things. It seems to me those are another set of voices going alongside this single unitary voice. So yeah, I guess there was voices in the body as well as voices in the head. Even though, and oh, I don't know how that fits in really. Yeah, I just thought I'd add that on anyway.